there, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Spooky Clutter, and welcome to the first episode of the HallowScream Review Series. Over the next several months, we will be reviewing every Halloween film leading up to Halloween Ends later this fall, and will be concluded with a ranking stream for all the films. Now, for this series, we'll be collaborating with several content creators including Good Real Hunting, Bacon Pew Pew, Mega Movie Z, Jeffman316, Camp Blood Media, Fauci's Cinema, and Braden Timmons. You can check out their channels in the description below. So without further delay, let's start with the immortal classic, John Carpenter's Halloween from 1978. When horror fans think of iconic slashers that define the genre, characters like Leatherface, Jason Voorhees, and Freddy Krueger usually come to mind. Of course, most of us never forget the silent masked killer Michael Myers that stalked his way to theaters in 1978's Halloween. Now, while Michael Myers isn't the first slasher killer, you could say he is the one responsible for making the slasher genre as popular as it is today. After this film's release, countless imitators and knockoffs began springing up. This formula of a mass killer racking up a body count is a formula that would define an entire decade of cinema and is still going strong today. What's most fascinating about this film is that it was a low budget film and being directed by a relatively fresh faced director. Yet, it feels like it was done by a master filmmaker. And John Carpenter has gone down in cinema history as one of the best horror directors, and rightfully so. This film feels genuinely eerie and suspenseful, with the soon to be popular POV shots of the killer looking at his unsuspecting victims and scenes of Michael slowly walking around stalking people. It really does put you in an uneasy mindset, and of course, all of this is magnified by the amazing score by John Carpenter himself. All these elements immerse you in the world that has been crafted here. As we would see in the years to come, John Carpenter has mastered the ability to instill fear and a sense of uneasiness in his films, and have those feelings linger after the film is long over. It's the kind of effect that makes you look behind your back while you're walking or sitting down, or even makes you afraid of the dark. I remember first watching this film about 5 years ago, and this was at a time when I was just getting into horror films. My first proper horror franchise was Friday the 13th, but one of the first horror films I ever watched as a child was John Carpenter's The Fog, so I guess you could say that I came full circle. My first impression of this film was a combination of excitement and uneasiness. So many things about this film fascinated me as I watched it. The film follows Michael Myers from a young boy who murdered his sister to a grown man that carries on his evil practice of murder on Halloween night. Why did he do it? No one knows, and that's one of the biggest strengths of this character. The lack of motive and the fear surrounding that idea makes Michael as an antagonist much more effective. Unlike the cheap Rob Zombie imitation of Michael Myers, which makes me want to dive headfirst into a lion enclosure at the zoo every time I think about it.
Likes cripples.
Bitch, I will crawl over there and I will skull fuck the shit out of you.
Most slasher films typically feature a killer with some kind of motive, like revenge or personal gain. We see this with characters like Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, where they want to get revenge for some wrong that was done to them or someone they care about. However, with Michael, this motivation is not here. He has no rhyme or reason for killing people, he simply does what he does. Sadly, this feature does change as the series goes along, but we'll get to that later. For me, the idea that someone kills for no reason and that anyone can be chosen at random is more unsettling than a killer with a motive. It's the idea that this situation can happen to anyone that makes this an effective horror film that lingers in your memory as time goes on. The film also does a fantastic job of using elements that makes the audience feel like they're in familiar territory. Having shots of the suburban neighborhoods gives off a sense of relatability for the viewers to connect with. You have a couple houses where some of our protagonists are for a majority of the film. You have the school, and of course the ominous Myers house. A lot of neighborhoods usually have that creepy house in the area where kids could spread rumors and make up ghost stories. It gives off an urban legend vibe that many can relate to. The house where something scary or bad happened it's now condemned, so people begin having ideas like the house is haunted. All of this serves to immerse the audience, and it's very effective. Many horror films, both before and after, utilize this idea. For example, The House in A Nightmare on Elm Street, Camp Crystal Lake and Friday the 13th, and even some classic Universal horror films use this. So John Carpenter knew what tropes and cliches to use in this film. We also have our protagonists, some of whom are the stereotypical high school shitheads commonly found in these slasher films. and some of their dialogue is questionable, with the use of the word totally being used way too often.
You know, it's totally. I'll be totally wiped out.
I don't think you have enough to do tomorrow.
Totally.
Though I think I'd rather hear that than having to sit through 5 minutes of Ghostbusters 2016. But aside from that, you want to root for some of these characters to survive. As they start dying off, we have our final girl Laurie Strode, played by future Scream Queen Jamie Lee Curtis, that becomes the sole survivor of the killings. And I think it's safe to say that the character of Laurie made the final girl trope as popular as it is, considering many horror films would continue to utilize this formula in the future. The character of Michael Myers is a terrifying and effective villain. One of the reasons is because he doesn't speak, so he gives off this sort of unnerving vibe. He isn't the typical scary monster that goes boo. He's a silent assassin with no emotion or motivation. Of course, other than to kill. And you know what? It helps to sell all of this is Michael's counterpart, Dr. Samuel Loomis, played brilliantly by Donald Pleasance. The scenes of Dr. Loomis explaining Michael Myers to other characters is awesome. This, paired with the creepy music, helps to sell the ominous presence that Michael has on the town of Haddonfield.
I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes.
And the dynamic I feel between these two harkens me back to the rivalry of Van Helsing and Dracula in the classic Universal horror films, where you have the hero character that tries to warn everyone of the evil and the monster that's doing all the killing. Once again, you can see that these small features in classic horror help to inspire future generations of filmmakers. Unlike many horror films where the victims go to the evil, this time the evil comes to them. Of course, in those films, the killer was typically a supernatural being, with a few exceptions like Leatherface or Norman Bates. And for most of the film, you think this is the case here with Halloween. We see that Michael feels pain, he makes sounds that would usually identify him as being human. However, at the end of the film, we suddenly have this ominous and stomach-sinking feeling that makes the film even more scary. Let me explain. Throughout the film, we've been under the impression that Michael was an ordinary guy, aside from the fact that he killed his sister and lacked any kind of identifiable human emotion. We have Dr. Loomis explaining that there was nothing inside him, no fear, joy, or sorrow. He was just there. He just was what he was. Loomis says that he has the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes, which sounds very creepy. With that all said, there was nothing to suggest that he was anything more than just a man. At the end of the film, Dr. Loomis saves Laurie by shooting Michael 6 times at point blank range, and then he falls off the balcony. We see that Michael is lying on the ground, not moving, so we assume he's dead. After all, who could survive 6 point blank shots and fall off a balcony, right? So Loomis goes to see if Laurie's alright. They have this fitting bit of dialogue about Michael being the boogeyman. And as Loomis goes back to look over the railing, Michael is gone. We have the incredible Halloween main theme play as Loomis looks out, realizing that Michael is still out there, somewhere. And without straight up telling us, we have this understanding, at least on some level, that there is more to Michael than meets the eye. And Dr. Loomis's face says it all. And it's as if he knew that Michael would be gone. What a great way to end a horror film. You think the nightmare is over with the villain dead and our main protagonist surviving their terrifying encounter with evil incarnate, then boom, he's no longer where he was lying, and we get several shots of the different areas we've seen him earlier in the film. This is all accompanied by the sound of Michael breathing in the famous Halloween theme. The mask of Michael Myers, as many of you already know, is shaped off the face of William Shatner. Wow, who would have thought that Captain Kirk would be the face of a legendary horror icon? Of course, as time goes on, the mask goes through several looks and changes. Man, I swear, it feels like Michael's going through more changes as the series goes along than a college student with a gender studies degree. With that said, the mask of the first film will always be the best for me. It's a simple look that can't be beat. It's also interesting to point out that several people played Michael Myers in this film. For the role of adult Myers, the most well-known performer is Nick Castle. We also have Deborah Hill, who played as the POV shot of young Myers that stabs Judith at the beginning of the film, and Will Sandin as the young Myers. Tony Moran and Tommy Lee Wallace even played Michael during the film. And it's crazy to think that one character had multiple actors play the role in just one film. Of course, you wouldn't know because Michael was wearing a mask most of the time anyway, but regardless, the performances were fantastic and accomplished what it set out to do, which was to scare the piss out of unsuspecting moviegoers. I'd also like to point out that there are some really interesting references to other horror films on Halloween. For example, I'm sure it's no coincidence that the character of Dr. Loomis bears a similar name to the character of Sam Loomis in Psycho. And aside from it most likely being a nice nod to Psycho, it would be cool if these characters were one and the same. Both feature a mentally disturbed killer that goes crazy, and maybe Loomis's experience with Norman Bates inspires him to become a doctor to understand the criminal mind. Throughout the film, we see many characters watching a horror movie marathon on the TV. This type of presentation is similar to things like Mystery Science Theater, Joe Bob Briggs' Monster Vision, and Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. The movie that was playing on there was The Thing from Another World, a film that John Carpenter himself would later remake. All these elements in Halloween just shows the passion that Carpenter had for the genre. For me, this is the best that the Halloween series could offer. It was a simple story with familiar elements and a solid cast. There really wasn't a need for a sequel, but the demand was too high, and this small, low-budget horror film became a franchise legacy. So stay tuned for August 1st as we continue the HallowScream Review Series with Halloween 2. Also make sure to check out the other great content creators that are a part of this collaboration series. And a special thanks goes out to Mother Mulder and Kyle Curtis Flett, part of the Dark Aether Files Patreon. And as always, until next time, my fellow investigators, remember that the entertainment is out there.
I'm Special Agent Spooky Clutter.
I'm Special Agent Carter Sauce.
Special Agent Dr. Richtofen.
And until next time, fellow investigators, remember
The entertainment
is out there.
is out there.